Today, we're going to look at the world monetary system and what it costs us, the U.S. taxpayer. I can't speak to other countries, but once they find a profitable game plan, the elite seem to repeat it across the world. Have you ever considered what would happen if the Federal Reserve somehow disappeared and the U.S. Treasury made decisions about our money? As many know, the Federal Reserve has been an agency that operates outside of any oversight that is independent of themselves. Like so many industrial complexes that have been created, they are either exempt or, at the very least, limited from any sort of oversight or liability. It's kind of like lawyers. They can win or they can lose, but you still owe them the bucks. So let's get started on this story about how a monetary system and a group of very wealthy people can gain control of the world. The Federal Reserve wasn't created in some backroom, surreptitious secret meeting. It was passed by the United States Congress after extensive debate and negotiation and signed by President Woodrow Wilson. The act created the Federal Reserve and established the central banking system of the United States. That's how long an independent establishment has had the power to unilaterally control interest rates and the production of money in the United States, thereby controlling the lifestyle of Americans through their monetary policies and decisions. There is much confusion about the relationship between the Federal Reserve and the United States government. In recent years, I've seen AI and more controlled narratives trying to tell us, or at least imply in some way, that the Federal Reserve is controlled by the U.S. government, but the more actions we see, the more reason we have to question this. A prime example is President Donald Trump, who recently started calling Jerome Powell, the current Federal Reserve Chair, "Too late, Powell." So we can expect to see something big happening with the Fed soon. Personally, I think the deal is already done and we're waiting for the right time to unroll it. Powell was appointed by President Trump during his first term in office, but it still remains to be seen whether he's a fixer or just part of the problem. Could Powell be an actor refusing to lower the rates so that we can usher in a new monetary system after proving just how harmful the Fed is for the fiscal health of Americans? Time will tell. So enjoy the show. We know that there's always more than what it seems, and there's always a purpose to these narratives that pop up over and over and over again in the media, who just bites into it all. So all President Trump has to do is lay the breadcrumbs, and the media starts chomping, thereby serving the higher cause without even knowing it. All right, so I'm going to give you a few down and dirty secrets about the Federal Reserve that you may not know, and you can decide whether we should take back control of our money or not. So let's get to those facts about the Federal Reserve that people may not realize. Hopefully, I will keep this simple enough so that you can go research further if you need to, with a few very simple questions. The second part of the series is going to address the Satanic or Luciferian agenda, which is clearly going to be the next disclosure effort that's going to occur to help the world wake up to what has truly happened to this amazing planet that we have been trusted with. My goal is to make sure that this never happens again by awakening people to not only the good stuff of the future, but the bad stuff of the past, so that we never repeat history. First, please hit the like button. It's so easy and does so much. Then share the video to help others awaken and leave a comment, because without an active community, a YouTube channel can't survive. If you'd like to support the channel, I humbly ask you to support my work with either monthly memberships as low as $3.99 a month and as high as $99 a month for full personalized health and wellness consultations designed to create a personalized plan for your healing. Also, there's one-time tips or super thanks that are also a huge help. I just want you to know that any support you give me, especially at this point of struggling growth, is so appreciated. We don't have the funding of big corporations or advertisers, and we don't really want it because, as we're about to find out, money controls everything. So here we go. First, the Federal Reserve was created by the Federal Reserve Act on December 23, 1913, allegedly in response to the banking panic of 1907. Existing banks caused the panic of 1907, but they weren't the sole cause. Banks and trust companies heavily financed speculative investments, particularly in railroads and copper, stretching their reserves thin. Many banks extended loans with inadequate collateral, amplifying losses when investments failed, like the United Copper Company scheme. Banks were linked through loans and deposits, so when trusts faced runs, it strained major banks, spreading panic. So banks wanted to access emergency funds when they conducted risky banking practices, but had no such cushion without a central bank. Not only did the Act establish the Federal Reserve System, but it established 12 regional Federal Reserve banks and a board of governors in Washington, D.C. that we pay for. So the first little-known fact is that the Federal Reserve Bank was established to pull banks out of a financial problem that they caused with speculative lending and investment, kind of like a teenager running up the credit card you gave them to the max. So you establish a non-stop overdraft fund to protect them from their bad spending habits. So the banking crisis that the banks caused occurred in 1907, and in 1910, key bankers such as Paul Warburg and Nelson Aldrich met secretly at Jekyll Island, Georgia, to draft the Federal Reserve System's blueprint. They used first names and posed as a hunting party to avoid scrutiny. So 3 years before its enactment, bankers were planning how they were going to create the Federal Reserve, and there was secrecy from the start. Another Federal Reserve secret is that the Fed claims exemption from Full Freedom of Information Act, FOIA, compliance due to its hybrid public-private status, withholding detailed payroll data for 98.4% of its 23,000 employees, citing privacy over public interest. So the people that control our money believe they don't have to comply with Freedom of Information requests. Next, the Federal Reserve Bank of New York allegedly holds one of the world's largest gold reserves of about 497,000 gold bars, worth roughly $400 billion as of 2023. This gold is allegedly stored in the Fed's vault, 80 feet below the streets of Manhattan. Most of this gold belongs to foreign governments and international organizations. So why are we paying for these underground facilities to store other people's gold? I think we deserve an explanation. The Fed is the only regional bank with a permanent FOMC vote, which is the official decision that shapes U.S. interest rates and monetary policy. The Fed also executes the Fed's market operations, giving it unparalleled influence over our economy, more than the U.S. Treasury has. Most federal agencies are subject to transparent audits, typically conducted by the Government Accountability Office or independent auditors under the Inspector General Act, with results often publicly reported. But not the Federal Reserve. The Fed chose a firm to audit itself, KPMG LLP. We pay them. This company that the Fed chose to audit themselves is a Delaware limited liability partnership, wholly owned by its approximately 2,000 partners who are not fully listed due to the private nature of the partnership. The Federal Reserve pays this audit company $9 to $10 million a year for audits, with money that ultimately comes out of our pockets. Next, the Federal Open Market Committee meetings, where key interest rate decisions are made, are closed to the public, and the meeting transcripts are kept confidential for 5 years. So a group of unelected bankers get together and decide what they are going to do regarding interest rates in our country, and they don't have to listen to our elected officials, not even the President of the United States. Am I the only one who has a problem with this? If you have listened to me for a while, you know that I have consistently said that to find the dirt, we must follow the buck. So I looked into how much is actually being paid in high-level salaries for the privilege of controlling our money in secret meetings while defying the commander-in-chief. Annual salaries of chairmen, governors, and presidents comes to about $11.2 million a year. So that you understand how this money pit works. This much money goes to about 24 people. There are 12 regional Federal Reserve banks with presidents who make the organization of Federal Reserve is quite convoluted by design. The Board of Governors members are federal employees, but regional Federal Reserve banks and their presidents are not. They are called quasi-private corporations owned by member banks, so their presidents' salaries are not reported on federal employee pay sites. They also don't file IRS Form 990 because they're not nonprofits. The only time you see exact salaries for all 12 Federal Reserve presidents is when the Fed includes them in an annual report statistical table, and that hasn't been done since 2015. But 10 years ago, those 12 presidents made a base salary of $4 million a year, and the Federal Reserve Board last reported a total of $1.3 million, also in 2015. Let's update those figures to today, where estimates are that the average annual salary for a Federal Reserve Bank president is around $810,000 as of August 2025, and the board now gets paid over $1.6 million for their 8 annual meetings. So for all these people to make decisions in a few meetings a year, we get the bargain bill of $11.2 million for these 19 people to control and hide our monetary policy decisions from us. But that's not all. The Fed employs about 20,000 people at an average of about $150,000 a year. So that's another $3 billion a year to run a system that we pay interest on every time we need money. The organization of the Fed and who owns and controls it is extremely convoluted and unprecedented, and there's a justification for every criticism of their behavior, but the bottom line is that we pay interest on money that doesn't exist. It is printed out of thin air, and there is nothing to hold it together if the dollar collapses. I had a discussion with ChatGPT and got another reversal. In the face of a bankrupt government and a Federal Reserve that refuses to act, it is possible to bring in a gold-backed currency that is already in place and anchored by a trusted exchange system. This shift would restore faith in the nation's money, halt runaway inflation, and stabilize an ailing economy. I'm telling you guys that the things we heard years ago from Number 17 are all falling into place as viable solutions that defy the official narratives. Will they happen? We don't know, but we know that things aren't always as they seem. So all continues to be progressing, and let's end with this quote from The Art of War by Sun Tzu. Hold out baits to entice the enemy, feign disorder and crush him.